We started last week our Gospel Rhythms series. And before that, we talked a little bit about our identity in the gospel, right? We talked about how we're a family of missionary servants sent to make disciples who make disciples, right? Our identity comes from God's identity. If He's our Father, we're His children. We're brothers and sisters. We're family to one another. If He's a Spirit and the Spirit always sends, we're sent ones. Sent ones, missionaries sent into this world to tell the good news of Jesus. And if He's a good King, the Son who came to serve and not to be served, we're servants. So we're a family of missionary servants sent to make disciples who make disciples. That's your identity. That's who God is creating you to be right now. Now, we said, now the question comes in, how do you live this out? Right? How do you live this new identity without just adding a whole bunch of busyness on top of your already very busy life? You know, how can you live the life that God created you to live without getting burnt out? Right? Well, we said last week then that if the only thing that you're doing with God, if the God moments are in the extraordinary times of your life, the extraordinary, right? Like maybe when you come to church or you go to a Bible study or an MC or you have your quiet time with God, right? If it happens in the extraordinary or out of the ordinary times of life, then your ordinary life, which is the majority of your life, is really just being used by yourself and the enemy. Right? God gets very little. And so what we need is ordinary life to be saturated with God's good news. Right? We need ordinary life lived out with gospel intentionality. That is, with an intention of using it for God's glory. Seeing it through the lens that God has come to seek and to save the entire lost world and to bring the lost children home, to restore what is broken. And so when we see our lives through that lens, the ordinary life through that lens, that's where we're really meant to live out our Christian life. Right? And we said this is difficult to do without adding stuff to it unless you look at the rhythms of life. You know, those things that are common to all people in all places and in all times. Stuff that everybody does. No matter when or where you live, what language you speak, or what culture you come from. And we identified 6 rhythms that every group of all time have always lived in. All right, last week we talked about one of those rhythms of eating, right? Every people group eats, right? You cease to become a people group if you cease eating, right? You die. But every people have a rhythm of eating. Now, what are some big takeaways that you remember from last week? Maybe not. Or busy eating. Okay. Yeah, so every time you eat, you have a chance to grow with somebody, right? That's why eating alone probably shouldn't be your normal rhythm of life, right? Eating with others builds community. And so, think about your family identity, that God's made you all brothers and sisters to one another through the gospel, through the good news of Jesus. And so, as you eat together and share meals together, you grow together as family, right? You learn more about one another. You learn what kind of burdens others are carrying and how to pray for them and how to walk with them and carry those burdens with them, right? You learn more of their story and their background, which might, feed into that missionary identity, right? You learn more about them and you have suddenly some tangible handle to hang the gospel on. Right? Oh, you tell me that this is the main pain through your life. Well, this is how I've seen Jesus give me some healing in a similar situation. Right? It can make you a good missionary. We said you could also build relationships with people who don't know Jesus yet through eating. Right? One of the big problems with the church is that the church eats with the church. They live with the church. They hang out just with the church. And so, the common thing, when this culture says Christians are something, what do we usually call them? Hypocrites. Right? And that's because the wrong people are the ones hanging out with the rest of the world a lot of times. Right? And there's a lot of great Christian people who are living a good Christian life, but they're doing so just with other Christians. So no one sees that they're good. No one sees the love and the kindness and the acceptance that they have because they're only eating with people like them. Right? But Jesus came and he ate with sinners, Scripture says. Sinners and tax collectors was the accusation. And Jesus said, hey, I've come for the sick, for the people who know that they need help. I didn't come for people who think that they've got it all together and are deluding themselves. Right? They're not willing to be helped, but I'm come for those people who know that they need help. Right? Which are people who live jacked up lives, which is really all of us, but some of us don't think that that's the case. Right? But Jesus came to identify with rebels, identify with sinners, people who've rebelled against him and his ways, and to bridge the gap and to build community with them and to say, I'm for you, I'm not against you. And we're too called to eat with one another so we can build that family identity, but eat with people who don't know Jesus yet in hopes that one day we might have an opportunity to tell them about it. In hopes that one day they might see our love and our acceptance and our generosity and say, there's something about this Jesus you talk about. Right? We said that you have 3 meals a day. 3 times a day where you say, I've got a need. And God's providing for this need. He's providing it with good stuff. All right? 3 times a day that you can come and say, man, I'm so thankful for what you provide. 3 reminders that God gives us everything we need. So that even if you're eating a corn dog, and you might love corn dogs, or you might be one of those, like corn dogs are kids' food. Right? I went through a phase where corn dogs were kids' food, and now I just love them again. They're awesome. But I mean, even if it's a corn dog and you're not particularly fond of corn dogs, and you're eating it though, and you're saying, Lord, thank you for this marvelous food. I know it's not my favorite, but you give me what I need. You provide for me. You sustain my body, and you sustain my life. Thank you so much for giving me what I need. And if you really love it, you'd be like, thank you for this moist, tender, corn-breaded goodness of hot dog on a stick. You are so good. This tastes so amazing and smells phenomenal. And you've got a chance to praise God as well. You have 3 times a day where you can say, hey, what are you guys thankful for in your family or your group of friends? What's going good today or this week or in this season of your life or in your relationship? What are you thankful for? And then when you got a time, when you're done, you can say, hey, let's thank God for that. I believe he gives us all good things. And all that good stuff we're thankful for came from him. And you have a chance to worship God and thank him as a good provider. And you have a chance also to say, what do you guys need? Right? Where are you lacking this week? Where are you hurting this week? Where do you need help this week? And you have a chance to take those things to our good provider as well. You also have a chance to kind of bond together as family and servants and serve one another through maybe helping to carry those burdens. Well, he said you could be a servant through the meal too, by preparing it or by setting the table or by cleaning it up. Sometimes being a good servant is just praising the cook, Say, man, that was awesome. You obviously care for me because you made this awesome meal. Right? We serve others that way. Right? Today we're going to talk about another rhythm we're calling recreate. What does the word recreate mean? What do you think of when you hear the word recreate? Relax. Yeah. What else? Doing something you don't always do in your everyday life or normally do. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So you could actually, it's not just fun stuff or hanging out, but you could actually recreate and work, right? And you think, you could look at it, break it down, recreate, all right? And the idea is that God created everything, and He made us in His image, and we're creators at heart. And so when we work, we're recreating, we're participating in the work of creation that's ongoing, right? But it's different work. Right? Like yesterday, I just said I'm going to rest. I'm not going to do anything connected to my work. And I'm just going to be at peace with who I am and with what God's done. Right? And I ended up like cleaning like an inch worth of dust off of our ceiling fan. Like a few, and then a number of other ceiling fans that were in a little bit better condition, and changed the furnace vent and stuff, and did some housework. But it wasn't work. At least not like normal work, right? It was a different kind of work that's out of the ordinary. It was a work that kind of rebuilt me, filled me up rather than drained me like normal work sometimes does, right? What else comes into your mind when you hear the word recreate? Anything else? That might be it. Having fun. Yeah. Just having fun. Right, here this is our recreate statement. It says, we take time to rest, to play, to create, and restore beauties in the way that reflect God and the work of the gospel to others. Right? So that's all kind of what you guys said is in there. Right? Rest, play, create, restore beauty. And the whole world does that. Right? They might not do it to reflect God, and they might not do it to somehow display His goodness in the gospel, the good news of Jesus. Right? But everyone does that. And you see recreation at the beginning. We said last week that all these rhythms find their root in the beginning of the story. And so you look at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and you see God creating everything, right? And He creates in 6 days. And what does He do on the 7th day? He rests, right? Why does He do that? You think He was tuckered out? You know, like, whew, that was a lot of work. I got to sit back in my cosmic recliner, right? Maybe. But if He's all powerful, right? If He's truly a God and the God, if He fits our definition of what God is, right? No, He wasn't tired, right? He wasn't worn out. He wasn't tuckered out. Rest biblically is not, man, I'm drained. I need to rest. I'm drained. I need to stop working. I'm drained. I need to take a break. That's not rest according to the Bible, right? Biblical rest means I'm ceasing from my labor because I'm satisfied with what's been done. And that's important. I'll say it again. Biblical rest means I'm ceasing from my labor because I'm satisfied with what's been done. Notice I'm not satisfied with what I've done, but I'm satisfied with what's been done. See, God creates 6 days, and then He ceases from His labor. After each day, He says, this is good, this is good, this is good. On the final day, He says, man, this is very good. There's nothing more to do. I'm done, and I'm satisfied. Right? Now, did Adam and Eve rest when they were created? Did they rest and enjoy what God had done? What do you guys think? So they didn't have much to do besides be happy and rest. Okay. Anybody think they didn't rest? Brian? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, was that toil, though? No, not at all. Right? So, Brian said, they had dominion over the earth. They were tending the garden, taking care of animals. Right? They were working, but they were in a place of rest while doing it. When do they stop resting? When they went to the tree. Yeah. You see, part of the reason why they went to that tree is because they said what God has done isn't enough. It isn't satisfying enough. See, Adam and Eve, when they believed the lie, they bought into the idea that there's more work to be done. There's more to be done to secure their future, that God's work wasn't sufficient, and that somehow they had to go farther through their own efforts. Right? They lived in this tyranny of the more when they believed the lie. Right? There's more they got to do. There's more that's got to be done. There's more that they've got to do to prove themselves, to secure their good and their future. Right? That was the lie. Yep. So in essence, the serpent, the enemy in disguise, Lucifer, Satan, the adversary, the enemy, right, comes to them and says, hey, God told you could rest, that he's done it all, but he really hasn't. You need to do something now. And it's that fruit over there. You need to take a step further than what he's done. You've got to add to his work. Right? Now think about it, though. That wasn't the reality. It shows you the power of lies, right? It wasn't their reality. They didn't have to toil to get anything that they enjoyed in the garden. They were given life to the full. They didn't have to toil to get fruit. It was an enjoyable labor because God made the fruit grow. He provided the fruit. And all they had to do was simply hold out their hands. Right? It was there in full. Nothing was working against God's creation, giving them everything that they needed. Right? Now, those of you guys who are farmers or gardeners, right? Don't you wish that there was no weeds? Right? No drought, no pestilence, no thorns. Right? Today there are plenty of things fighting against what you need. Not just physical thorns, right? But stuff in your life that you have to work past. Right? Stuff that is barriers to the goodness that you need for your life. But in the beginning, all right, there were no thorns, no thistles, nothing working against the production of what we needed. And humans even had that authority to rule over the world, right? To rule over the plants and the animals, and did everything that they wanted. Right? You see, God's initial intent was that he would work 6 days and he'd rest one day, and we would live an eternity within the rest of what he's done. That for our entire existence, which was to last forever, we never had to toil once, but we'd rest in him. Now, that's not the case anymore, right? It's hard to get what you need in life. It's hard to get what you want, but it's hard to get what you need too. right? There's all these thorns and thistles in the way of getting the food, right? Choke out the food, right? Keep you from getting to the food. Cause extra work of sorting out the good from the bad, right? And in your jobs and in your relationships, there's plenty in the way of the good that God always intended for you as well. All right. You see, after Adam and Eve buy the lie and think they need to do something to earn their place before God, to secure their future, right? God says things are changing now. Right? He says thorns and thistles and will cover the ground. It'll be hard to scratch out an existence on the earth. Life won't come easy. It'll be hard to sustain. Right? And then he turns to the woman and says, life won't come easy through you either. There'll be pain in childbirth. And you know that that's the case if you've ever been part of that or seen that. Right? And all of this comes because Adam and Eve didn't rest. They didn't rest in what God had done, what God had provided for them. And they thought something in that tree, some wisdom or some fuller life could be gained. And in doing so, they opened up their lives to an endless toil. And all of us are still trying to say there's something more to be gained. There's something more I don't have. There's something more I need to do to prove myself, to secure my future, to protect my life, to give me hope. Now, if you might remember this story from the Old Testament, we often go back to the Exodus story when God's people are in bondage in Egypt. They're slaves. They're living in toil. Right? And then God sends Moses, and through the plagues, and through separating the Red Sea, he brings God's people through the sea into the Sinai Peninsula. And then promises, I'm going to give you a land of promise. I'm going to give you a land of rest. You've come out of a place of slavery, a place of toil, a place of hardship. I'm going to give you a place of peace, a place of abundance, a place of where you can live for generations in prosperity and goodness and protection. And if you remember that story, it shouldn't have taken long to get to that land of promise. Right? They end up taking 40 years ultimately to get there. But they get there first, 40 years earlier, right after the Exodus. And Moses sends in spies into the land of Canaan, the land of Israel today. And he says, hey, check out their cities, check out their fortifications, check out their strength, check out the animals there and the soil and the richness of it and the fruit that it produces and report back to us. And so you remember that story. They sent out those 12 spies. 10 were bad, 2 were good. If you remember that that song rather. And 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, come back and they say, this land is everything that God has promised. There's so much abundance, so much riches, such fertile soil that we've never seen a land like this. In fact, they were supposed to bring back samples of the food, and Joshua and Caleb cut like a cluster of grapes that's so big that they got to hang it from a stick and carry it on their shoulders between them because one man couldn't handle it. Right? He says, this is the abundance. We don't even have to work for this food. It's so big, so great, so generous. And the other 10 say, yeah, that's all true, but there's giants in the land. There's a huge barrier there. If this land would ever be ours, there's so much work to be done to secure it and to take it. It's impossible. And you see what happens is God's angry because he's brought them through out of slavery and brings them to the edge of the land of promise, and they don't want to go in. They don't want his rest. They think that they have to do work to secure it, and they won't trust him to do it. And so they end up spending like 40 years in the desert, and he says, you will never enter my rest. And so all of the people, the current generation dies in the wilderness, and their children, and then only the two faithful spies, Joshua and Caleb, enter the land of promise. But the story still says, they never truly found rest. Not that they had hoped for. Not quite as God had promised. Right? Are you at rest? Are you at rest? Are you trusting the rest that God has given you? Are you trusting his work and living in the reality that he has done enough? The beauty of eating 3 meals a day and seeing it as an opportunity to remember that God is for us and not against us, to remember that he identifies with us even though we're rebels at heart, that he has given us everything that we need, including our salvation, is that 3 times a day we see that he provides and he's sufficient and he's worthy of worship. How do you think that would change the way that we worked? Right? If we clung to that truth 3 times a day that he provides everything. What do you think would happen? How would our work change, or the way that we view work? We would enjoy it and look forward to it, maybe. All right. Okay. Maybe I don't have to work ultimately. I'm provided for. Right? Yeah, because God's given you everything. So you still do what you need to, right, to support yourself and to your family and the like. But there's not that anxiousness of, I got to do this, or everything's going to fall apart, or I've got to do this perfectly, or I got to please so-and-so, or I got to look better than all these other people at work. All right? Oh, your work and what you do becomes an act of worship. Yeah. If you truly see that everything's been given you, your work serves a different purpose then. All right? Then you work knowing, man, God has made me to work. He's made me to tend this world through whatever means that is. Right? And I'm going to do it all to the glory of God. I'm going to do it all as a representative of Jesus. And you do it out of joy and thankfulness for what God's done, rather than I've got to do this so that I can secure my future. Right? If you truly were worshiping God and showing thankfulness for all that God's done and seeing him as a good provider every time you ate a meal, right, you'd likely not see your work as what made you right before God or before others. You'd likely stop looking at your work as what gives you ultimate significance, as ultimately what gave you your security, because God's the one who does all that for you. And you'd be reminded of the truth 3 times a day, so it'd be harder to believe the lie that there's more to be done. Right? If you're an artist, right, or a craftsman, or somebody, or an engineer, right, suddenly you might find yourself getting a lot more creative because you're not working out of a need to prove yourself, or you're not working out of a need to necessarily fit somebody else's vision perfectly in order for them to be happy with you or pleased with you. But suddenly you would say, wow, I've got the approval of the Father in heaven because of the work of Jesus. You'd be free to be creative and how much more wonderful and beautiful things would come out of our industries and our arts and our music if people lived and rested in God's work. Right? You'd be free of the fear of failure. So you'd be able to risk to be the most creative, the most daring individuals and workers because you knew that he'd provide everything. You know that he approved. There'd be beauty and awesome things being made all the time because of it. So are you at rest? I'll ask that again. Are you at rest? Do you have a deep soul confidence that God is for you and with you and that you have nothing to fear? Or are you looking around and just seeing giants in the land before you? Are you looking around seeing all the obstacles that you have to work around and through? I'd like to turn to Hebrews chapter 4. It's on page 921 or 831. Page 921 or 831. Hebrews chapter 4. It says in verse 1, God's promise of entering his rest still stands. So we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. Right? So he's saying God's offer of rest still stands. So man, we should say, wow, this is so important. We want others. We want everyone to trust in his rest so they don't miss it. He says, for this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them, just as it was to the people of the Old Testament from the story I just told you. But it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. For only we who believe can enter his rest. As for the others, God said, in my anger I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest. Remember, that's what God said when they said, no, there's giants, we don't want to go in. And he said, well, fine. You'll spend the rest of your lives in the wilderness. Your children will enter my rest. Right? Even though this rest has been ready since he made the world. We know it is ready because of the place in Scripture where it mentions on the seventh day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. But in the other passage, God said, they will never enter my place of rest. So God's rest is there for the people to enter. But those who first heard this good news failed to enter it because they disobeyed God. So God set another time for entering his rest, and that time is today. God announced this through David much later in the words already quoted. Today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. So what has God done? What has he offered all people? Another chance. Yeah. A chance at what? A rest. Yeah. A chance to enter his rest. Right? Initially, he rested the seventh day, and that rest was supposed to last for eternity for all of us. Right? And the Israelites didn't want it. Or they still believed the lie that they had to secure it themselves. Right? But God's offered another chance for all people, right, to enter into it. Why don't people enter into his rest, though? According to the Hebrews here. disobeyed God. How did they disobey God according to the passage? You might have to infer it a little bit by... They were hesitant and not trusting in him, right? Right. It says, right, but it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. Right? And God said, I've done it all. It's freely yours. You don't have to toil. You don't have to work to secure your future. I've done it. Trust me. And they didn't listen to him. They didn't believe his promise. Right? And believed the lie instead. But you get it by belief, it says. Right? For only we who believe can enter his rest. We who trust that Jesus did it all. And all to him I owe. Right? As the song says. Sin had left a crimson stain. He made it white as snow. Right? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Is that what that's from? Yeah. Old gospel hymn. Right? He did it all. Those who trust that he worked on our behalf. Those who believe in him. Right? Can enter his rest. So have you heard God say rest? Have you heard God say stop striving? Have you heard him say, let me be God for you? Let me take charge of all the giants in your life and work for you and secure your future for you. Have you heard him say that? Have you heard him offer you his rest? You know, if you haven't, hear it today. He's saying it to you through his word. He's saying, don't harden your heart. Hear it through my voice. Trust in him and rest in his work. Trust that he will provide and will deliver you from all the giants and secure your hope and your future. How did he do that? Right? Jesus comes and does the work for us. Right? He enters into this place of toil, and it says that he's a man of hardship, familiar with suffering. Right? He toils on our behalf through his entire life long, does it perfectly without complaining, without trying to use his work and his creativity to establish his own identity or his own standing before God or others. Right? And then he dies on the cross, and dies the death we deserved, and rises from the grave so that we could be certain that we'll rise as we trust in him. See, we don't have to come to a holy God and point to our own goodness and point to our own accomplishments and say, this is why you have to let me in. This is why I would really love for you to give me life and secure my future. But at the end of time, we'll stand before God and we'll say, I am perfect in your sight. I am blameless in your sight. I've done all things right and I've trusted you fully. But it actually wasn't me. It was Jesus in my stead. His goodness is my goodness. His work is my good work. His trust is my trust. His record is mine because he took all the times that I misused my work, all the times that I strived to secure my own future, my own good. And he took it all and put it on the cross. And he gave me his perfect obedience. A great exchange has taken place. And because of him, I'm worthy. So Jesus is so great. We get to stand before God and say, he's done it all. You know my faults and you know my shame. And I thank you so much for taking it away and making me right. And so we can rest. Because if that's the future, we know we have nothing to strive for now. because that's our end destination, we know we don't have to work to secure our own land of rest. We don't have to prove ourselves to God or to ourselves or to others, because Jesus proved himself on our behalf. He's gracious and good and kind, so we can rest. Now, how do you know if you're resting? Let me ask you that. How do you know if you're at that place of rest where you're truly trusting that God's done it all? What does life look like in those times? Joyful even when it's not going right. All right, it's a fruit of the Spirit. Right? When the gospel truth is planted in your heart, when you're watering it by just feasting on God's goodness through his word, reminding yourself of the truth of God's love for you in Jesus and the fact that he's done everything for you. Right? Joy comes up because maybe he's done the work for you and he's just put the fruit on the tree and it's ready to fall, like in the garden. Sometimes life is like that. And you say, man, thank you, God. You provided for me again. Right? And other times you fail or you struggle and you say, thank you, God, that this day will sometime end. One day the time of striving will be over. And I thank you that you provide for me even when I mess up with my own striving and my own plans. All right, what else? How do we know when we're resting? When we're truly at rest. Your mind's at ease. Right? The worries are gone. Yeah. There's been times when I've just simply been living in that truth and like some big stuff went wrong. We were out of a lot of money and we didn't have money to fix what was broken or replace what was broken. And people came up and said, how are you doing this? I'd be freaking out right now. You're like, well, God's good. He's provided for me every step along the way. May not have had everything I wanted or everything I needed, but I'm still here. He gave me everything I needed. He's so good. And I know all that he's promised, and I know that he's good on his promises, so I've got nothing to worry about. He'll provide, and he always does. How else do we know that we're at rest? Circulation. What do you mean by that? Yeah. Yeah, so if you were truly at rest, right, your body would start to reflect some of that, right? And use a fancy word, psychosomatic, right? What you think affects the physical, right? The psyche, the mind, affects the soma, the body, right? And if we were truly at rest and peace with what God's done, right? That stress, that worry, that really racks our bodies and fills up bodies with tension would start to mellow out. Right? So it would affect us wholly, mind and body and soul and spirit. Right? Yeah. Anything else? I think we could live a day without accomplishing anything. Right? Jeff Vanderstelt, who I owe much to him for this whole series and this whole idea of gospel rhythms, he's kind of a mentor that doesn't know me. Right? I've met him a couple of times, but his church Soma communities has really transformed my ministry in the way that I see life and discipleship. But he says if you're truly at rest, You could play with your kids or with someone else's kids, and which seems very insignificant. Right? But I don't know how many times I play with my kids, and I got to get up and check my phone to see if someone called me back or emailed me back or messaged me back with something that I was trying to do or trying to accomplish with some work I needed to do. Right? But you could play with your kids all day long or do something else all day long and not accomplish a thing and be content with it because you're not creating a record for yourself. You know the world's not going to fall apart without you being in the game for a day or for an evening or however long that is. You know, you'd truly be at peace with that. Right? And that's something I'm asking God to teach me because I don't want to be thinking about work when I'm playing with my girls or when I'm hanging out with my wife or hanging out with friends. Right? I want to think about Jesus. That's always on my mind. But I don't want to think about the stuff that I don't like about my job. So, if we truly believed all of this, I'll end with this. If we truly believed all of this, and we were at rest, not because we were not working, but we were at rest because of God's work being done, right? How would our lives look different? And what would that produce? What do you get? Yeah. So we'd really get a lot of stuff done maybe, right? Because we'd be truly working out of rest. I mean, think about it. God created, well, that moved close to my face or something. God created in 6 days. He gave his rest, and he said, live in my rest and work from a place of rest. Right? So when they tended the garden, they said, oh, yeah, this is awesome. I just have to go here and the fruit falls in my hands. Right? Nothing works against it. It was a joy. Right? And that would start bleeding into our lives, and we'd say, I don't have to do this because I need it or because I need it to secure my ultimate future in good and hope. But I do this because God's given me everything. Right? We'd work out of rest without worry. Right? It would change that quite a bit. Well, how else would life change? What would be the consequence of living that way, I guess? Yeah. Other people would view what was happening in your life and they'd say, what's going on? Aren't you stressed out? Aren't you worried that they're going to lay people off again? Right? That's one of the problems with getting your identity from work. And all of us do. All of us get our identity by what we do. Right? That's the way of religion. It jacks us up. Right? But the problem is when you lose your job, what happens to your identity? When you can't do what you've always done, or they find someone more talented, or they downsize, or you get injured or sick, or you just get too old to work, or you die. Where's your identity there? Right? But if you truly know the work's been done, your identity isn't in what you do. It's in who you are in light of what God has done. Right? It's that you're a child of God. And your soul is at peace then, as the song says. Because you know there's no more striving. There's no more need to prove yourself. You're who you are because of Jesus. And people will notice and say, why? How are you able to do this? And you're able to talk about the one who's done everything for you and how good God is